Hey guys, Chris here, and I'm a Ukrainian Canadian. Today is January 20th, 2024, and let's get to the news happening in Ukraine, shall we? So let's talk about Russian air defense in Russia. So today, Yuri Ignat, which is a spokesperson for the Ukraine Air Force, confirms that Russia is sacrificing its own air defense and its defense of its own skies in Russia to defend the front line right now. And that also includes Crimea. And essentially places like Moscow, St. Petersburg, and other areas, including Putin's bunkers, most likely in the south, in the Caucasus, and also in St. Petersburg, will be more in danger of being attacked by Ukraine missiles and drones. So this is excellent news. And again, why is Russia doing this? Well, I think especially in terms of Crimea, we know that they're doing everything possible to protect and defend the Kerch Bridge and also the Black Sea Fleet. And even with that, we've seen how much of a failure it was. Russia has lost multiple ships in 2023, and they will certainly lose more this year. There's no doubt about it. And this will allow, evidently, the Ukrainians to continue striking key Russian targets in Russia, whether it be military or infrastructure. So this is good news because, as I've mentioned previously, Ukraine needs to be able to continue and multiply its efforts at hitting Russian targets within Russia. So speaking of that, there's an oil depot right now in the Bryansk region that is on fire, which is not too far away from Ukraine. And this was the result of a Ukrainian drone that flew in and destroyed this oil depot. And to this day, because this happened, if I remember correctly, 2 days ago, they haven't yet taken this fire under control. So the Russian firefighters are still fighting this massive fire that was pretty much equivalent of that St. Petersburg warehouse fire that I've talked about, I believe, last week. And so essentially, this is a very important, key, critical oil depot for the Russians because of how close it is to Homel airfield in Belarus. Now, if we take a look, just to give you guys a point of reference, again, this is northern Ukraine, and Bryansk region is right over here, so just above Sumy and Chernihiv Oblast, and Klintsy. So this is the area where the Ukrainians struck this oil depot, and you can see that it's very close to Homel, and there's an air base that is not too far away here. You can see the Zyabrovka airfield, which the Russians used to then attack Kyiv in the early phase of the war, and also launch multiple offensives in the north and surprise the Ukrainians in February 2022. So very important, target for the Ukrainians. And we have heard rumors that the Russians are considering to launch another type of attack again in these regions in the next few months. It's possible. So I think that this is also Ukraine's way of really reducing this Russian offensive, the capacity of the Russians to mount an offensive here by destroying an essential and key critical oil depot. Excellent news. And again, Ukraine needs to continue doing that everywhere in Russia. Destroy these oil depots, air bases, key factories producing weapons for the Russian military. Now, let's get back to the main slides, and I want to talk about electronic warfare. And this is a very underlooked, I think, aspect of war, but very important in the current context of the war. We have drones flying, we have computers, and more technology in modern warfare. So electronic warfare is something that is seldom overlooked, and I think Ukraine also overlooked this aspect. And evidently, because Ukraine is flying, thousands of drones per day throughout the front line, this is more important than ever. The Russians have good jamming capabilities and good electronic warfare systems. And so Ukraine, according to this Telegraph article, have now been able to match Russian capabilities in terms of electronic warfare on several fronts, including Krinky in the left bank of Kherson and also in Avdiivka. So this is excellent news, and Zaluzhny talked about it, that it's one key component that Ukraine needs to work on. And it's good to see that it's really picking up pace, and Ukraine is developing its own, tactics to counter Russia. Because also, let's face it, Russia's been able to match what Ukraine, in the beginning had as an advantage. It was the drone production. It was also skillfully flying drones, and so Russia's matched that as well. Obviously, through the help of Iran and other partners such as China giving key components for Russians to build their drones. So because of that, now as I've talked about it, Avdiivka and Krinky, the Russians are having a lot of trouble flying their drones, and especially in Krinky, the Russians are getting obliterated by the Ukrainian forces because they essentially are they don't see anything. Their communications are constantly being jammed by the Ukrainians, and essentially that's what's going on. So this is very good news that Ukraine also is reinforcing its electronic warfare sector. And before I finish with this unfortunate video, I just want to talk a little bit about the strategy for this year for Ukraine. My opinion about the strategy is that I don't see a Ukraine offensive happening, the one like last year in 2023 in the summer, happening this year. I don't see the resources being provided to Ukraine and the help that would allow the Ukrainians to launch a massive counteroffensive. Yes, the F-16s will help, but there are a few dozen. And I think that if anything in the last 2 years, if history's taught us something in the last 2 years, that we cannot now count too much on, these tanks that Ukraine's going to receive, it's going to blow out the Russians. I think that has pretty much, that sort of narrative is gone, because we know that the Russians are very well defended at this point. They've built very strong trenches throughout the front line, and this will make the Ukrainian job, no matter how many tanks it has, no matter how many bombs, much more difficult, as the Russians have reinforced the entire front line with trenches and very heavily defended positions. So because of that, even if Ukraine is going to receive F-16s, several large and important longer-range cruise missiles and bombs, I don't see the Ukrainians for this year to launch a massive offensive, the likes of what we saw back in Zaporizhzhia last year. So what is the main goal for this year for Ukraine? It is to continue to draw the Russians into traps and black holes, essentially making them weaker and weaker and weaker, forcing them to invest resources and manpower to exhaust them. And Ukraine has done that very brilliantly in the last few months. Again, Krinky is one of them. I don't see now at this point that the Ukrainians have high hopes of, liberating large amounts of territory here. It's all about just, drawing the Russian resources on the left bank, because they know how important for the Russians it is to hold the left bank. And even if Krinky is a small village, the Russians find it unacceptable that the Ukrainians have an ability to hold positions here on the left bank. So the Russians are doing everything possible to drive out the Ukrainians from Krinky. So this is one trap that the Ukrainians have set for the Russians. They will constantly throw troops here at very high costs. The Russians have lost so many vehicles and tanks and troops in the forests of Krinky and also the main roads leading to Krinky. And we've seen videos as well. It's pretty disastrous here for the Russian military. So this is one trap. Then we have Avdiivka. Evidently, Avdiivka is the biggest one. The Russians have lost in the last few months, since October, over 30,000 troops, right? More or less 20, let's give it 20,000, because the numbers are very unclear, but let's give it 20,000. I think that's a safe bet. And you can count how many wounded as well come with that, because the Russians don't medvac their troops. There's no medical evacuation whatsoever. They're just left there to die, all these wounded Russian soldiers. And then 500 armored vehicles that the Russians have lost since October of 2023. We're talking about just 3-4 months at most, and the Russians have lost so much already in Avdiivka. So this is another black hole for the Russians. And Kupiansk, there's also Bakhmut, and Bakhmut was more of a black hole for the Russians in 2023, but it still is, with the Ukrainians now kind of holding the position around Bakhmut, and the Russians are doing everything possible to drive out the Ukrainians from Bakhmut. It would be an embarrassment for the Russians if they were to lose the city. And the Ukrainians were very dangerously close to Bakhmut. Now they've been able to do some counteroffensives here, but it's been relatively difficult for the Russians to drive out the Ukrainians completely. And so because of the Ukraine presence that is very close to Bakhmut, the Russians are also essentially throwing a lot of meat in this sector. So this is another kind of black hole for the Russians. And the other trap is evidently the north of Ukraine through Kupiansk. Now this front line has not moved in months. Anywhere from Kupiansk all the way up to Kremina, this has not changed, or Lysychansk, right? The Russians are pushing, and they have a lot of troops committed here. and it's not working out for them. They're on the offensive since last year, and especially in Kupiansk, they're just mindlessly trying to attack the village of Sinkivka, and they're failing constantly. The Russians are losing troops all around here and a lot of armored vehicles. I've talked about it many times, and I shared with you guys the stories of large Russian convoys being obliterated trying to attack Sinkivka, because this is the first village which the Russians need to take to get to Kupiansk. So that's the strategy right now, is to continue exhausting the Russians for this year. And then in 2025, perhaps setting the stage once Ukraine accumulates enough resources and maybe has a successful mobilization in 2024 to launch an offensive in 2025. We will see. Time will tell, and things will change. So that is my opinion for now, but it can certainly change in the future. And the last thing I want to share with you guys, and this is the unfortunate video of another interview by 1420, this Russian interviewer which interviews people around Russia. And this is, another round of interviews with some younger Russians about basically them being willing to risk their lives to go and fight in Ukraine. And we will see what their answer is. So are you ready to risk your life and go there to get $2,000 a month? He asks Pavel. I'm ready to go there for free if they call me. If they call me, I'll go. It's not a question of money. This is a matter of ensuring the future of the country and the whole world. The future of the whole world, the whole civilized world. Still, the Russians consider themselves civilized after what we've seen them do in Ukraine. I'd definitely go there if I had the required skills. And this is Stanislav, a student who is 20. Alexei, 35, construction worker. I'm going to join soon. I'm in the process of paperwork. I want to go there. So you ready to risk? I'd go there any minute. I'd go there if I was young. I mean, you look pretty young to me. It would have been easy back then, but now, he's 57. I mean, you're within the mobilization age group. But you guys get the point, but the most troubling one is this guy. This is the last kind of interview I wanted to share with you guys. So this is Daniil guy who's 22, who is, I believe, a soldier right now. So he's already enlisted. Or it doesn't... I'm not really sure, but I believe he's probably already a soldier if he's so willing to go to Ukraine. So I'm thinking about signing a contract. I'm thinking about doing it in the upcoming days. And this is a 22-year-old. First of all, it's very cool to serve the country. Second of all, you can peacefully kill people without going to jail. So I didn't know that peacefully killing people exists. You fight for Rus. At the end of the day, you won't be punished for that. For Russia. And there's another cool thing. You can catch the Nazis. Then you can torture them, you put them on their knees, and then you cut their heads off. It's very good. It gives you confidence and pride. And you even get $2,200 for that. So you'd be ready to go there. I'm ready for this experience. I like to get money for killing people. So that, unfortunately, again, I'm not saying this is, all the Russian young people are like that, but there's a lot of them that have been so brainwashed that they believe this and they say it openly in the streets, right? Imagine if somebody said that, you were talking to someone, a colleague of yours, and you would say such a thing. It's absolutely ridiculous. So he believes that beheading and killing and torturing Ukrainian people and soldiers is a good, peaceful act. And this is a huge problem. Daniil is one of, I believe, hundreds of thousands of people that believe such things, that are convinced that what they're doing is good and good for the civilized world. And aside from the effect of brainwashing, the problem is also that these Russians aren't experiencing this war that the way that the Ukrainians are experiencing it. They live far away from Kiev, from Kharkiv, that the Russians are shelling on a daily basis. And they're not afraid because of that. The Ukrainians are not striking back at civilian infrastructure and civilian housing. And so the Russians think that everything is going according to plan. They're relatively, unshaken. And that's why I'm saying that the Ukrainians need to make it felt in Russia. I'm not saying hitting civilian targets. I've always been against that, but hitting key infrastructure, factories, railway hubs, and logistics, the Russian logistics in Russia. This is absolutely essential for Ukraine. So these Russians have a different perspective on the conflict in Ukraine, because then you're gonna have a lot of Danils that certainly will go to Ukraine and commit atrocities. So all I have to say is see you in Avdiivka, Danil. I hope that you will soon find out how much great you're doing to this world. But that's the video for today, guys. I hope you enjoy my updates. Again, if you guys enjoy my content, subscribe to my channel and like my videos and leave me a comment. So I will see you guys in the next one. Slava Ukraini!